In 1972, Polaroid sold 9.4 million cameras. Walk into any American home that December, from Boston suburbs to California beach towns, and you'd find that distinctive white-bordered square sitting on a coffee table. The image developing before your eyes. Shake it. Watch the colors bloom. Hold your memory in your hand 60 seconds after the shutter clicked. One company owned this miracle. One name meant instant. They employed 21,000 workers. They generated $1.4 billion in revenue. They controlled 100% of a market they invented. Then, something went catastrophically wrong. The factories fell silent, and the empire that made America believe in magic filed for bankruptcy. Bridgeport, Connecticut, 1909. A boy named Edwin Land is 5 years old, and he's already different. While other children play stickball in the streets, Edwin sits alone in his room conducting experiments with a magnifying glass, bending sunlight into rainbows on his bedroom wall, watching, wondering, obsessing. His father runs a scrap metal business. His mother keeps a modest home. They don't understand their son's fixation with light. They don't discourage it either. They let him tinker. They let him wonder. They have no idea they're raising someone who will fundamentally change how humanity captures memory. By 13, Edwin is reading college physics textbooks. By 17, he's enrolled at Harvard, one of the youngest students in his class. But Harvard can't hold him. The classrooms feel too slow, too rigid, too disconnected from the questions burning in his mind. He's obsessed with one particular problem: polarized light. Light waves that vibrate in a single plane instead of all directions. Scientists have understood polarization for decades. Nobody has figured out how to create a practical polarizing filter. The existing methods require expensive crystals, careful laboratory conditions, equipment costing thousands of dollars. Edwin Land looks at this problem and sees opportunity. In 1926, at 19 years old, he drops out of Harvard. His professors are horrified. His parents are confused. But Land has a vision. He moves to New York City, rents a tiny room, begins experimenting obsessively with polarizing materials. He works 18-hour days. He barely eats. He barely sleeps. He's trying to create something that every optical scientist in the world has declared impossible. A cheap, practical polarizing filter that can be manufactured at scale. The breakthrough comes in 1929. Land discovers that by embedding microscopic needle-shaped crystals of iodoquinone sulfate into a plastic sheet, then stretching that sheet to align the crystals, he can create a polarizing filter for pennies instead of dollars. Elegant, simple, revolutionary. He's 20 years old. He's just solved a problem that stumped the entire scientific establishment. Land returns to Harvard briefly to use their laboratory facilities. He never bothers finishing his degree. He doesn't need it. In 1932, at 23, he founds the Land Wheelwright Laboratories with his physics instructor, George Wheelwright. He almost no money, almost no equipment. What they have is Land's polarizing technology and an unshakable belief that it will change the world. The early years are brutal. Land and Wheelwright pitch their polarizers to every company they can find. Sunglasses, car headlights, camera filters, scientific instruments. Most companies don't understand what they're being offered. The rejections pile up. The bank account drains. Land's young wife, Helen, works to support them while Edwin burns through their savings on experiments. Then, in 1935, everything changes. Eastman Kodak agrees to incorporate Land's polarizers into their camera filters. American Optical Company licenses the technology for sunglasses. The military becomes interested in polarized goggles for pilots. Suddenly, the money starts flowing. In 1937, Land renames the company Polaroid Corporation. He's 28 years old. He's just getting started. But polarizing filters aren't Land's real obsession. They're just the foundation, the technology that will make him a legend, that will build an empire, that will change how humans relate to their own memories. That comes from a question asked by a 3-year-old girl. It's 1943. World War II is raging. Land is in Santa Fe, New Mexico, on vacation with his family. His daughter Jennifer is 3 years old. Land takes her picture with a conventional camera. Jennifer watches him wind the film, close the camera. She asks the question that will redirect the entire trajectory of his life. Why can't I see the picture now? Land tries to explain. The film has to be developed. It takes chemicals. It takes time. It takes a dark room. Jennifer doesn't understand. She just wants to see the picture. And in that moment, standing in the New Mexico desert, Edwin Land begins to wonder, why can't she? He takes a walk, alone, through the streets of Santa Fe, and in the span of a single hour, the entire concept of instant photography crystallizes in his mind. Not just the vague idea, the specific technical architecture, a film that contains its own developing chemicals, a system that processes the image automatically inside the camera, a photograph you can hold in your hands within seconds of taking it. Impossible. Every chemist knows it's impossible. The developing process requires precise temperature control, exact timing, careful chemical sequencing. You can't just slap all that into a film packet and expect it to work. Edwin Land doesn't care that it's impossible. He's solved impossible problems before. He returns from vacation and immediately redirects Polaroid's research efforts. The company is doing well making military equipment, scientific instruments, polarizing filters. Land doesn't care. He wants instant photography. He assembles a team of the best chemists and engineers he can find. He tells them what he wants. They tell him it can't be done. He tells them to do it anyway. The technical challenges are staggering. Land needs to create a film that contains 17 distinct chemical layers. He needs those layers to interact in a precise sequence, triggered by nothing more than being pulled through a set of steel rollers. He needs the entire developing process to happen at room temperature, in open air, in about 60 seconds. Every photography expert in the world would tell you this violates the fundamental principles of photochemistry. Land spends 4 years proving them wrong. The key to understanding instant photography is understanding what happens inside a conventional darkroom. When you take a photograph with a traditional camera, light strikes a film coated with silver halide crystals. Those crystals change chemically when exposed to light, creating what's called a latent image, invisible. The image exists, but you can't see it. To make it visible, you submerge the film in a developer solution. The developer converts the exposed silver halides into metallic silver, black. Then you rinse in a stop bath. Then you fix it in another chemical solution. Each step requires precise timing, specific temperatures, careful handling in total darkness. Edwin Land wanted to cram all of that into a film packet the size of a playing card, and he wanted it to work in 60 seconds, in broad daylight, as in the hands of someone who'd never set foot in a dark room. Impossible. Obviously impossible. The solution he developed was a masterpiece of chemical engineering. Instead of submerging the film in separate baths, Land created a film that contained all the necessary chemicals in microscopic layers. When you pulled the film out of the camera, it passed through a pair of steel rollers. Those rollers burst a tiny pod of chemical reagent, spreading it evenly across the image surface. That reagent contained everything needed: developer, alkali, an opacifying agent to protect the image from light, and a precisely calibrated mix of dyes. But here's where it got complicated. In conventional photography, you have black and white or color. The processes are completely different. Land wanted instant photography to eventually work in color. This meant building a system flexible enough to handle both. His team developed what they called the diffusion transfer process. Instead of developing the image directly on the film, the exposed areas released dyes that migrated through layers to create the final image on a separate receiving sheet. The chemistry was extraordinarily delicate. The reagent had to be viscous enough to spread evenly, thin enough to allow proper diffusion. The timing had to be precise. Too fast, and the image would be underdeveloped. Too slow, and it would be overexposed. The temperature sensitivity was brutal. A photograph developed perfectly at 70 degrees would look completely different at 50 degrees or 90 degrees. Land's team solved each problem methodically. Special polymers for consistent reagent viscosity. Chemical timing agents that self-regulated the development process. Temperature compensation built into the chemistry itself. The system would automatically adjust for environmental conditions. February 21st, 1947. The Optical Society of America holds its winter meeting at the Hotel Pennsylvania in New York City. Edwin Land takes the stage. The audience is full of scientists, engineers, industry executives, people who have spent their careers in optics and photography. Most of them assume they're about to hear another incremental advance, another minor improvement to existing technology. Land pulls out a camera. He aims it at the audience. He presses the shutter. He pulls a tab on the side of the camera. 60 seconds later, he holds up a finished photograph. The room goes silent. Then it erupts. Land has just demonstrated the impossible. A working instant camera. A device that eliminates the darkroom entirely. He's holding proof that everything they thought they knew about the constraints of photography was wrong. The scientists in that room understood immediately what they were seeing. This wasn't a gimmick. This wasn't a toy. This was a fundamental breakthrough in applied chemistry and optical engineering. The number of problems Land's team had solved, the elegance of the solution, the sheer audacity of compressing an entire photographic laboratory into a handheld device. Stunning. 1 year later, November 26, 1948, the Polaroid Land camera model. 95 goes on sale at the Jordan Marsh department store in Boston. The camera costs $89.75. The film costs $1.75 for 8 exposures. Land himself works the demonstration counter, showing customers how to use the device. The entire stock sells out before the end of the day. This is not a normal product launch. This is a cultural earthquake. For the first time in history, ordinary people can take a photograph and see it immediately. No waiting, no uncertainty, no sending film away to a laboratory and hoping the images come back. You press the button, you pull the tab, you wait 60 seconds, you hold your memory in your hands. The impact is immediate, profound. Professional photographers dismiss it as a novelty. They miss the point entirely. Land isn't trying to replace professional photography. He's creating something new. Democratic photography. Photography for everyone. Photography without expertise. Photography without patience. Photography without barriers. Sales explode. In 1949, Polaroid sells $5 million worth of cameras and film. By 1950, that number doubles. By 1956, the company has sold over 1 million cameras. The Polaroid Land camera becomes a fixture in American households, as essential as the family Bible, as common as the kitchen radio. But Land isn't satisfied. The Model 95 produces sepia-toned prints, not true black and white. The image quality is acceptable but not exceptional. The process still requires you to peel apart the negative from the positive. Time the development manually. Coat the finished print with a protective lacquer. Land wants something better, something simpler, something perfect. Throughout the 1950s, Polaroid iterates relentlessly. And they improve the chemistry, They simplify the process. They enhance the image quality. Each new camera model is better than the last. Each new film type pushes the boundaries of what's possible. Land drives his engineers mercilessly, demanding improvements that seem impossible until his team actually delivers them. In 1963, Polaroid introduces instant color film, another milestone that the photography industry said couldn't be done. Color processing is far more complex than black and white. Multiple dye layers, precise chemical interactions. Land's team cracks every problem. The result is a film that produces color photographs in 60 seconds. Handheld, no darkroom, no expertise required. By the mid-1960s, Polaroid dominates a market it created entirely from scratch. No meaningful competitors in instant photography, patents forming an impenetrable wall, research and development capability unmatched. Edwin Land has built something extraordinary, a company defined by continuous innovation, vertical integration, and absolute market control. And he's just getting started. The patents were Polaroid's fortress. From the moment Land demonstrated instant photography in 1947, he understood that the technology would be copied the instant it became profitable. His response was comprehensive, relentless. Patent everything. Every chemical formulation, every mechanical innovation, every manufacturing process, every incremental improvement. By the early 1960s, Polaroid held over 500 patents related to instant photography, a legal moat that no competitor could cross. Kodak tried. The photography giant watched Polaroid's success with increasing frustration throughout the 1950s. They had the manufacturing capability. They had the distribution network. They had the brand recognition. What they didn't have was a way around Land's patents. Every approach their engineers devised ran into Polaroid's intellectual property wall. Every alternative chemistry violated some claim. Every mechanical workaround infringed some protected design. The legal protection bought Polaroid something invaluable: time. Time to refine the technology. Time to build manufacturing expertise. Time to establish brand dominance so complete that Polaroid became synonymous with instant photography itself. When people said they wanted to take a Polaroid, they didn't mean they wanted an instant photograph. They meant they wanted the specific magic that only Land's company could deliver. But patents expire, and Land knew that legal protection alone wouldn't sustain the empire indefinitely. The only permanent competitive advantage was continuous innovation. The only way to stay ahead was to keep running faster than anyone else could follow. This philosophy shaped everything about Polaroid's culture. Land created a research environment unlike anything else in American industry. He hired the best chemists, physicists, and engineers he could find. He gave them resources. He gave them freedom. He gave them impossible problems and demanded they solve them. The company's research and development spending was extraordinary, often exceeding 15% of revenue, in an era when most companies spent 3 to 5%. The results spoke for themselves. Throughout the 1950s and into the 1960s, Polaroid released a steady stream of improved cameras and films, each generation better than the last. Faster development times, sharper images, better color reproduction, simpler operation. The competition couldn't keep up because there was no competition. Polaroid was racing against itself. Edwin Land became a celebrity. Not a business celebrity, not a technology celebrity, a genuine cultural figure. He appeared on the cover of Life magazine. He was profiled in The New Yorker. He received the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Scientists compared him to Edison and Einstein. He was the rare industrialist who commanded respect in both boardrooms and laboratories. A man who could discuss polymer chemistry with Nobel laureates and then walk into a shareholder meeting and explain why the stock price should be higher. His annual shareholder meetings became legendary. Most CEOs treated these events as obligations, boring recitations of financial results. Land transformed them into theatrical productions. He would demonstrate new products personally, pulling prototypes from his pocket, photographing the audience, showing them miracles they didn't know were possible. Shareholders left those meetings not just informed, but inspired. Evangelists for a company that felt less like a corporation and more like a cause. By the late 1960s, Polaroid employed over 10,000 people. Annual revenues exceeded $500 million. The stock price had multiplied 20-fold since the company went public in 1957. Land personally held patents worth hundreds of millions of dollars. He had become one of the wealthiest men in America, though he seemed remarkably uninterested in the money itself. What he cared about was the work. What he cared about was the next impossible problem. And the next impossible problem was the most ambitious project in Polaroid's history. Land called it the SX70. The cameras Polaroid had built throughout the 1950s and 60s were remarkable, but they still required user intervention. You had to pull a tab to initiate development. You had to time the process. You had to peel apart the layers. You had to coat the finished print. Land wanted to eliminate all of it. He wanted a camera that did everything automatically. Insert the film, press the button, watch the photograph emerge and develop before your eyes. No tabs, no timing, no peeling, no coating, pure magic. The engineering challenges were immense. The existing film system required physical separation of layers after development. Land wanted a film that stayed together, developing in plain sight while you watched. This meant completely reimagining the chemistry. The image had to develop from the front, not the back. The chemicals had to be contained within the film packet permanently. The entire process had to be light-safe from the moment of ejection. Then, there was the camera itself. Land didn't want just any camera. He wanted something beautiful, something that folded flat enough to fit in a pocket, something that looked like it belonged in a museum. He hired Henry Dreyfuss, one of the most celebrated industrial designers of the 20th century, to create the exterior. The result was a folding SLR camera that collapsed to less than an inch thick, wrapped in leather, finished in chrome, looking more like jewelry than a photographic instrument. The project consumed Polaroid for nearly a decade, so development costs exceeded $500 million, an almost incomprehensible sum in that era. Hundreds of engineers worked on the camera mechanics alone. Hundreds more worked on the film chemistry. Land drove them relentlessly, rejecting design after design, demanding perfection in every detail. The folding mechanism had to work flawlessly for years. The mirror system had to be optically perfect. The motor had to be silent. The ejection system had to be gentle enough not to damage the developing image. By 1972, after countless prototypes and endless refinement, the SX70 was ready. Land unveiled it at the annual shareholder meeting with characteristic showmanship. He pulled the camera from his suit pocket, unfolded it with a single motion, aimed it at the audience, pressed the shutter. The camera whirred softly. A white card emerged from the front slot, and over the next few minutes, as the shareholders watched in astonishment, an image materialized on that white surface. Colors bloomed from nothing. Faces appeared. Details sharpened, like watching a memory form in real time. The audience erupted. This wasn't just a better instant camera. This was instant photography perfected. This was the technology Land had been chasing since his daughter asked that question in Santa Fe 30 years earlier. This was the answer to every limitation, every compromise, every shortcoming of every camera Polaroid had ever built. Land commissioned the legendary design team of Charles and Ray Eames to create a promotional film. The result was a 10-minute masterpiece, treating the SX70 not as a consumer product, but as a work of art. a fusion of science and aesthetics that deserved serious consideration. The film premiered at shareholders' meetings and circulated through museums, positioning Polaroid not as a camera company, but as a cultural institution. The SX70 launched to the public in late 1972. The initial price was $180, equivalent to over $1,200 today. It didn't matter, customers lined up, reviews were rapturous. The camera won design awards, engineering awards, technology awards. It appeared in films and television shows. Celebrities carried them, artists adopted them. Andy Warhol became obsessed, creating thousands of Polaroid portraits that would become some of his most celebrated work. For Warhol, the Polaroid became an essential tool. He shot everything. Celebrities who visited his factory studio, street scenes, self-portraits. He accumulated thousands of instant photographs, using them as source material for his silkscreen prints, as gifts for friends, as a visual diary of his extraordinary life. The white border of a Polaroid print became as recognizable as his silver wig. When people thought of Warhol in the 1970s, they thought of Polaroid cameras clicking in his hands. But Warhol wasn't alone. Ansel Adams, the legendary landscape photographer known for his meticulous large-format work, became a Polaroid consultant, testing new films, providing feedback to Land's engineers. Helmut Newton used Polaroids for his fashion shoots. And David Hockney created massive composite works from dozens of individual Polaroid prints. Robert Mapplethorpe made intimate portraits. Walker Evans, in the final years of his life, worked almost exclusively with SX70 film. The art world's embrace wasn't accidental. Land had always believed that photography was an art form, not just a technology. He cultivated relationships with artists, invited them to experiment with new products, gave them access to equipment and film that wasn't available to the general public. Polaroid sponsored exhibitions. They collected work. They positioned themselves as patrons of artistic expression, not just manufacturers of consumer goods. This cultural positioning paid enormous dividends. When people bought a Polaroid camera, they weren't just buying a device. They were buying access to a world where serious artists worked, where creativity was valued, where the boundary between amateur and professional dissolved in a flash of light and a whir of ejecting film. The camera democratized photography in a way that nothing before or since has quite matched. The numbers reflected this cultural dominance. By 1978, Polaroid's revenues exceeded $1.4 billion. The company employed 21,000 workers worldwide. Their stock price had climbed to levels that seemed almost irrational. Analysts who covered the company used words like unassailable and permanent to describe its competitive position. Polaroid owned 100% of the instant photography market because Polaroid had invented instant photography and defended it with an impenetrable wall of patents. The cultural saturation was complete. At weddings, Polaroid cameras sat on every table, allowing guests to capture moments that would appear in the couple's hands before the reception ended. At birthday parties, children watched their faces emerge from the white void of developing film. At family reunions, grandparents posed for pictures they could hold immediately. No waiting, no uncertainty, no risk that the lab would lose the film or ruin the processing. The Polaroid became synonymous with a specific kind of American moment, the technology of intimacy, the technology of spontaneity, the technology of right now. In an era before smartphones, before digital cameras, before instant gratification became the default expectation, Polaroid offered something magical, a bridge between the moment and the memory, spanning just 60 seconds. Land presided over this empire like a philosopher king. His offices in Cambridge, Massachusetts contained no desk. He worked standing at a tall table, sketching ideas, reviewing designs, arguing with engineers about problems they insisted were unsolvable. He arrived early. he stayed late. He was 70 years old in 1979 and showed no signs of slowing down. His management style was unusual. He gave his research teams enormous latitude, encouraging them to pursue ideas that seemed impractical or even impossible. He believed that constraints were mostly imaginary, that the only real limit was imagination itself. When engineers told him something couldn't be done, he took it as a personal challenge. When his entire career had been built on doing things that couldn't be done. But this same confidence that built the empire contained the seeds of its destruction. Land's certainty in his own vision made him unable to see threats that didn't fit his worldview. His faith in the primacy of chemistry made him dismissive of electronics. His belief in the magic of physical photographs made him blind to a future where photographs might not be physical at all. The first warning signs were already visible, though almost nobody at Polaroid recognized them. In the 1960s, NASA needed to transmit photographs from spacecraft back to Earth. Film wasn't practical for this application. You couldn't exactly retrieve a roll of film from a satellite orbiting the moon. The solution was electronic imaging, converting light into electrical signals that could be transmitted as data and reconstructed as images on the receiving end. Primitive, by later standards. But it worked. It proved that photographs didn't require chemistry. They didn't require film. They didn't require any physical medium at all. Throughout the 1970s, electronic imaging improved steadily. The sensors got better, the resolution increased, the costs came down. In 1975, a Kodak engineer named Steven Sasson built the first self-contained digital camera. It weighed 8 pounds. Recorded images to a cassette tape. Took 23 seconds to capture a single photograph at a resolution so low it barely qualified as an image. A laboratory curiosity. A proof of concept. Nothing that threatened the dominance of film. But Sasson understood what he had created. He showed it to Kodak's executives and told them this technology would eventually replace film entirely. The executives didn't believe him. They were making too much money on film to take the threat seriously. Polaroid's executives were equally dismissive. Electronic imaging was interesting from a scientific perspective, they conceded, but it had no practical application for consumer photography. The resolution was terrible. The equipment was expensive. The images couldn't be printed without complex additional technology. And most importantly, electronic images lacked the tangibility that made Polaroid special. You couldn't hold a digital photograph. You couldn't watch it develop. You couldn't feel the weight of a memory in your hands. Edwin Land agreed completely. And Sarker Teet. He had spent his life mastering chemistry and optics. He had built an empire on the magic of physical photographs appearing before your eyes. The idea that consumers would want to look at photographs on a screen instead of holding them in their hands seemed absurd. It violated everything he understood about why people took pictures. This dismissiveness wasn't stupidity. It was a failure of imagination by people who had succeeded too completely within one paradigm to see beyond it. Land was a genius. His executives were smart, capable people, but they were trapped by their own success, unable to conceive of a world where their core technology became irrelevant. The trap was closing. They just couldn't see it yet. The hubris was understandable. Land had been right about everything for 40 years. He predicted instant photography would work when chemists said it was impossible. He predicted the market would embrace it when business analysts said it was too expensive. He predicted the SX70 would succeed when engineers said the folding mechanism was too complex. Every time experts told him he was wrong, he proved them wrong. Why should he believe them now about electronic imaging? The problem was that Land's genius had always operated within a specific domain: chemistry, optics, materials, science. He understood molecules and light. He understood how silver halides responded to photons. He understood diffusion and dyes and polymer membranes. Electronics was a different universe, governed by different rules, advancing at a different pace. Moore's law meant that electronic capabilities doubled every 18 months, while costs fell by half. Chemistry didn't work that way. Chemistry improved incrementally. Electronics improved exponentially. But before the electronic future could arrive, Polaroid faced a more immediate disaster, one that Land himself had engineered. In 1977, Polaroid launched Polavision. The concept seemed brilliant. If instant photography was magical, imagine instant movies, a camera that recorded moving images onto film that developed automatically, producing a finished movie you could watch within 90 seconds of shooting it. No processing labs, no waiting, no specialized equipment, just point, shoot, and screen. Land was obsessed with the project. He drove his engineers just as relentlessly as he had driven the SX-70 team. The technical challenges were enormous. Motion picture film was far more complex than still photography. The chemistry had to be different. The mechanical systems had to be different. The entire paradigm had to be reimagined from scratch. The team delivered. Polavision worked exactly as Land envisioned. You loaded a film cartridge into the camera, shot up to 2.5 minutes of silent footage, ejected the cartridge, and inserted it into a viewer. The film developed inside the viewer cartridge. Within seconds, you could watch your movie on a small built-in screen, a genuine technological achievement. The chemistry was elegant. The mechanics were sophisticated. The overall system represented years of research and hundreds of millions of dollars in development costs. It was also a catastrophic commercial failure. The problem was timing. In 1977, the same year Polavision launched, JVC released the VHS videocassette recorder. Sony had introduced Betamax 2 years earlier. The home video revolution was beginning, and it made Polavision instantly obsolete before it even reached consumers. VHS tapes could record an hour of programming. Polavision cartridges held 2.5 minutes. VHS tapes could be erased and reused indefinitely. Polavision cartridges were single-use. VHS systems connected to your television for family viewing. Polavision required a dedicated viewer with a tiny screen. VHS tapes cost a few dollars each. Polavision cartridges cost $7 for less than 3 minutes of footage. VHS had sound. Polavision was silent. The comparison was devastating. Consumers took one look at both products and made the obvious choice. Why would anyone pay more for a system that did less? Polaroid had spent an estimated $250 million developing Polavision. They had built manufacturing capacity for millions of units. They had trained sales staff, prepared marketing campaigns, negotiated retail distribution agreements, all of it wasted. By the end of 1979, Polaroid wrote off $89 million in Polavision losses. The product was quietly discontinued. For the first time in the company's history, Polaroid had bet big on a technology and lost. The failure shook confidence throughout the organization. If Land could be wrong about Polavision, what else might he be wrong about? The board of directors began asking uncomfortable questions. Land was 70 years old. He had run the company with almost no oversight for decades. And his management style was idiosyncratic, his spending unconstrained, his vision increasingly detached from market realities. The directors respected his genius, but they wondered whether his time had passed. In 1980, they got their answer. Land resigned as CEO, though he retained the title of chairman and continued his research activities. The official announcement framed it as a planned transition, a natural evolution of corporate leadership. The reality was more complicated. Land had been eased out by a board that no longer trusted his judgment. His successor was William McCune, a longtime Polaroid executive who had spent decades implementing Land's visions. McCune was a capable administrator, but he wasn't a visionary. He didn't have Land's ability to see around corners, to imagine products that didn't exist yet, and to inspire engineers to achieve the impossible. Under McCune, Polaroid would be competently managed. It would not be revolutionized. Then came Kodak. For decades, Eastman Kodak had watched Polaroid's success with mounting frustration. They were the world's largest photography company. More resources, more engineers, more manufacturing capacity, more retail relationships than Polaroid could dream of. But they couldn't compete in instant photography because Land's patents blocked every path into the market. In 1976, Kodak decided to push through anyway. They launched their own instant photography system. Claiming their technology was sufficiently different from Polaroid's to avoid patent infringement, it wasn't. Land knew it immediately. So did Polaroid's lawyers. The lawsuit that followed would become one of the largest patent infringement cases in American history. Polaroid accused Kodak of willfully copying protected technology. Kodak claimed their innovations were original. The legal battle consumed years, millions of dollars in attorney fees, depositions, expert witnesses, technical demonstrations, competing interpretations of chemistry and engineering that left judges struggling to understand the fundamental science at issue. In 1985, after nearly a decade of litigation, a federal court ruled in Polaroid's favor. The decision was total, devastating. Kodak was found to have infringed 7 Polaroid patents. The court ordered Kodak to cease all instant photography operations immediately. The immediate impact was extraordinary. Kodak had sold 16.5 million instant cameras. Every single one of them was now orphaned, unable to use film that would no longer be manufactured. Kodak offered to swap customers' cameras for conventional film cameras and coupons for processing. The company set aside $400 million for the exchange program. Then came the damages phase. Polaroid demanded $12 billion. The number was astronomical, unprecedented in patent litigation. Years of additional legal proceedings followed as courts evaluated the claim. Finally, in 1991, 15 years after the suit was filed, Kodak agreed to pay $925 million to settle all claims. The largest patent infringement settlement in history up to that point. Polaroid had won. Definitively. Totally. When their patents had been vindicated. Their technology had been protected. Their enemy had been crushed. But it was a Pyrrhic victory. The Kodak lawsuit had consumed 15 years of Polaroid's attention. 15 years during which digital photography evolved from laboratory curiosity to genuine threat. 15 years during which Sony, Canon, Nikon, and dozens of other companies invested billions in electronic imaging, while Polaroid's lawyers fought over instant film patents. 15 years during which the fundamental technology underlying photography shifted from chemistry to electronics. And Polaroid barely noticed, because they were too busy defending yesterday's technology to prepare for tomorrow's. The $925 million settlement arrived in 1991. It should have been a windfall. It should have funded a massive investment in digital technology, a pivot toward the electronic future that was now obviously approaching. Instead, Polaroid used the money to pay down debt, buy back stock, fund dividends. The settlement wasn't treated as a strategic opportunity. It was treated as a financial event. Edwin Land watched all of this from a distance. He had formally resigned from Polaroid's board in 1982. Retreating to his private research laboratory to continue his scientific work. He was bitter about his treatment, hurt that the company he'd built had essentially pushed him aside. But he was also still brilliant, still curious, still conducting experiments in his 80s. He died on March 1st, 1991, at age 81, just months before the Kodak settlement was finalized. He never saw the money arrive. Perhaps that was a mercy. He also never saw what the company did with it. Throughout the 1990s, Polaroid drifted. The leadership changed repeatedly. CEOs came and went. Each new executive announced strategies and reorganizations and cost-cutting initiatives. None of them addressed the fundamental problem. Polaroid's core technology was becoming obsolete, and they had no replacement. The irony was excruciating. Polaroid had invented key components of digital imaging. Their scientists had developed charge-coupled devices, the sensors that converted light to electronic signals. They had built digital prototypes in the 1980s. They had filed patents on electronic imaging technology. But the company never committed to the transition. They kept hoping that instant film would remain viable, that digital photography would stay in the professional niche, that ordinary consumers would continue to want physical photographs developing in their hands. Alas, they were wrong, catastrophically wrong, obviously wrong, undeniably wrong. In 1994, Apple released the QuickTake 100, one of the first digital cameras marketed to consumers. It cost $749 and captured images at 640 by 480 resolution. The quality was laughable compared to film. The price was absurd, but it represented the future. In 1995, Casio released the QV10, the first digital camera with a built-in LCD screen for reviewing photographs. No film, no developing, no waiting. Shoot a picture. Look at it immediately on the back of the camera. Delete it if you don't like it. Shoot another one. The instant gratification that Polaroid had pioneered was now being delivered without any physical medium at all. The traditional camera companies recognized the threat and responded. Canon invested heavily in digital research. Nikon developed new sensors. Sony leveraged their electronics expertise to build cameras that improved dramatically year after year. By the late 1990s, digital cameras were genuinely good. Not as good as film in pure image quality, but good enough for casual photography, good enough for family snapshots, good enough for exactly the market Polaroid had dominated for 50 years. Polaroid's response was half-hearted, confused. They released digital cameras that used conventional storage media. They developed hybrid products that combined digital capture with instant printing. They licensed their brand to other manufacturers. Nothing worked. Nothing could work. Because the fundamental value proposition had shifted. Then people no longer wanted physical photographs immediately. They wanted digital photographs immediately. The difference was everything. In 1998, Polaroid reported a loss of $51 million. In 1999, they lost $140 million. In 2000, they lost $29 million, which looked almost like progress until you examined the underlying trends. Sales were declining by double digits every year. The debt load was crushing. The pension obligations were overwhelming. The stock price had collapsed from its 1997 high of $60 to under $5 by early 2001. The company tried everything. They restructured. They downsized. They sold assets. They laid off thousands of workers. They closed factories. They outsourced manufacturing. Even they cut research and development, which only accelerated the decline because now they couldn't even develop new products to try to save themselves. A death spiral. Each cost-cutting measure making the underlying situation worse. In January 2001, Gary DiCamillo, Polaroid's CEO, appeared on CNN and reassured viewers that the company was financially sound. Bankruptcy was not imminent. The fundamentals were improving. Management had a plan. 9 months later, on October 12, 2001, Polaroid filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. Total debt, $948 million. The company that Edwin Land had built from a standing room-only demonstration in a hotel ballroom 54 years earlier was now insolvent. The timing was brutal. America was still reeling from the September 11th attacks a month earlier. The economy was in recession. Consumer spending had collapsed. The bankruptcy courts were crowded with companies that couldn't survive the downturn. Polaroid was just another casualty, another household name becoming a footnote. The asset auction attracted several bidders. In July 2002, One Equity Partners, the private equity arm of Bank One, acquired Polaroid's assets for $255 million. They also assumed approximately $200 million in liabilities. The total value of the transaction was less than half of what Polaroid had received from Kodak a decade earlier. One Equity tried to revive the company. They focused on commercial applications rather than consumer photography. They developed digital products under the Polaroid name. They cut costs further. They streamlined operations. They did everything that modern private equity does to distressed companies. It wasn't enough. The consumer market was gone. Digital cameras had improved so rapidly that instant film seemed almost quaint. Why would anyone buy a Polaroid when they could buy a digital camera? Take unlimited pictures for free, email them to friends, print only the ones they wanted. The magic that land had created, the instant gratification of watching a photograph develop, was now available from any digital camera with an LCD screen. The numbers told the story with brutal clarity. In 2000, Americans bought approximately 28 million digital cameras. By 2003, that number exceeded 50 million. By 2006, digital camera sales peaked at over 100 million units worldwide. Meanwhile, instant film sales collapsed. The curve crossed somewhere around 2004. After that, digital dominated everything. Polaroid's new owners tried to adapt. They released digital cameras under the Polaroid brand. They developed portable photo printers. They licensed the name to manufacturers of televisions, DVD players, and other consumer electronics that had nothing to do with photography. The strategy was pure brand exploitation. Take a name that still carried nostalgic weight and slap it on anything that might sell. It didn't work. Wes, the Polaroid brand without Polaroid technology was just a word. The digital cameras bearing the Polaroid name were generic products manufactured in Asia, indistinguishable from dozens of competitors except for the logo. Consumers weren't fooled. They remembered what Polaroid meant, and this wasn't it. In February 2008, Polaroid announced it would discontinue instant film production entirely. The last batches rolled off the production line in June of that year. After 60 years, the technology Edwin Land invented was officially dead. The announcement triggered a wave of nostalgia. People who hadn't thought about Polaroid cameras in decades suddenly remembered the magic. The white border, the chemical smell, the anticipation of watching an image materialize. Social media filled with tributes and memories. Collectors began hoarding the remaining film stocks. Prices on expired Polaroid films skyrocketed, but nostalgia couldn't save the company. In December 2008, Polaroid filed for bankruptcy again. This time the circumstances were even more chaotic. The 2008 financial crisis had frozen credit markets. The economy was collapsing. Retailers were going bankrupt themselves. The auction that followed attracted fewer bidders and lower offers. In April 2009, a joint venture called PLRIP Holdings acquired Polaroid's assets for approximately $88 million. The buyers were Gordon Brothers, a liquidation firm, and Hilco Consumer Capital, specialists in acquiring distressed brands. Their plan was simple: license the Polaroid name to anyone willing to pay for it. This is where the story becomes both sad and strange. The Polaroid brand now lives as a ghost, attached to products that would have horrified Edwin Land. Polaroid-branded televisions made in China, Polaroid-branded tablet computers, Polaroid-branded portable speakers, Polaroid-branded action cameras competing with GoPro. None of these products have anything to do with instant photography. None of them represent innovation or quality or the relentless pursuit of impossible goals that defined Land's company. But there's another thread to the story. one that Land might have appreciated. In 2008, as Polaroid announced the end of instant film production, a young Austrian named Florian Kaps decided to do something about it. Kaps was an instant photography enthusiast who had been collecting Polaroid cameras and film for years. Mikami, he couldn't accept that the technology was simply going to disappear. Kaps traveled to Enschede, in the Netherlands, where Polaroid operated its last remaining film factory. The facility was scheduled to close permanently. The equipment was going to be dismantled. The formulas were going to be lost. But Kaps convinced the factory's workers to help him. Together, they formed a company called the Impossible Project. The name was deliberate. Land had built his career on doing the impossible. Now a group of enthusiasts was attempting to resurrect his technology after the company itself had abandoned it. The technical challenges were immense. Polaroid had never documented their film chemistry in a way that outsiders could replicate. The original chemists had retired or died. The raw materials were no longer manufactured. The Impossible Project team had to reverse engineer decades of accumulated knowledge, figure out how the films actually worked, then recreate them using whatever materials they could source. It took years. The early batches were inconsistent. Colors were wrong. Development times were unpredictable. Some films worked beautifully, others failed completely, but gradually the team figured it out. They rebuilt the production lines. They trained new workers. They developed new formulations that approximated the original Polaroid chemistry. In 2010, the Impossible Project released its first instant film for vintage Polaroid cameras. The quality wasn't perfect. The price was high. But it worked. The magic was back. The business grew slowly but steadily. The artists and photographers who had mourned the death of instant film discovered they could shoot again. A new generation of young people, raised on digital photography, discovered the unique appeal of physical instant photographs. The imperfection became part of the charm. The unpredictability became part of the experience. In 2017, the Impossible Project acquired the Polaroid brand itself and renamed the company Polaroid Originals. Later, they simplified it to just Polaroid. The name had come full circle. A company that started as a desperate attempt to save a dying technology now owned the brand that technology had made famous. Today, Polaroid sells both vintage-style instant cameras and modern digital instant hybrids that combine electronic sensors with thermal printing. The products are niche. The market is small. This isn't the empire that Land built. This isn't the dominant force that controlled 25% of American photography. But it exists. The technology survives. The magic continues. The story of Polaroid's resurrection represents something meaningful about human creativity and persistence. Land would have recognized the spirit, even if the scale would have disappointed him. He spent his life proving that impossible things were possible if you wanted them badly enough. The Impossible Project proved him right one more time. But the survival of instant photography as a niche product doesn't change the fundamental lesson of what happened to the empire Land built. The factories are still silent. The workers are still gone. The company that employed 21,000 people at its peak now exists primarily as a licensing operation, a name attached to products manufactured by strangers in distant countries. Drive through Waltham, Massachusetts, where Polaroid once operated its massive manufacturing complex. The buildings have been converted to other uses. Biotech companies lease the space. Software startups occupy the offices, where chemists once formulated film emulsions. The parking lots that once filled with thousands of workers' cars every morning now serve different employers, different industries, different dreams. This is the silent factory. Not a single building, an entire industrial ecosystem that vanished. Stand in the places where Polaroid once thrived, and you can hear the lessons in the silence. Lesson 1. Innovate or die. Edwin Land invented instant photography. His company also invented key components of digital imaging. They held patents on charge-coupled devices. They built digital prototypes in the 1980s. They had the technical capability to lead the digital revolution instead of being destroyed by it. But they didn't. They couldn't see past their own success. They were so good at chemistry that they couldn't imagine a world where chemistry didn't matter. They were so committed to physical photographs that they couldn't conceive of photographs that existed only as data. They had every advantage: talent, resources, brand recognition, customer loyalty. Workey, they had everything except the willingness to cannibalize their own products before someone else did. The market doesn't care about your legacy. It doesn't care about your patents or your history or your Nobel Prize quality scientists. It only cares about what you're offering today. Polaroid forgot that. They assumed the magic would last forever. The magic stopped. The market moved on. Lesson 2. The past can't save the future. Polaroid spent 15 years fighting Kodak in court to protect their instant photography patents. They won. They received $925 million in damages. And during those 15 years, while they were focused on defending yesterday's technology, digital photography evolved from impossible to inevitable. The Kodak settlement should have been a strategic opportunity. Nearly $1 billion to invest in new technology, new products, new directions. Instead, it became a financial event: stock buybacks, dividends, debt reduction. The money went to shareholders instead of research. It rewarded the past instead of building the future. Polaroid tried to compete on brand recognition. They tried to compete on nostalgia. They tried to compete on the emotional connection people felt to that white-bordered square developing in their hands. None of it mattered. The technology had changed. The customer had changed. The world had changed. And Polaroid hadn't changed with it. Your history might buy you time, but it won't buy you survival. The only sustainable competitive advantage is continuous innovation. Polaroid stopped innovating after the SX70. They made incremental improvements for decades. But they never made another leap. They never invented the next impossible thing. And when the impossible thing arrived from someone else, they had no answer. Lesson 3. Leadership matters more than legacy. Edwin Land was a genius. He invented polarizing filters at 20 years old. He created instant photography because his daughter asked a question. He built a company that dominated its market for half a century. He drove his engineers to achieve miracles. He saw possibilities that no one else could see, but Land also had blind spots. He dismissed electronic imaging as irrelevant. He wasted hundreds of millions on Polavision. He ran the company like a personal fiefdom, making decisions based on his own vision rather than market research or customer feedback. His confidence, which had served him so well for so long, became arrogance. And when that arrogance led to mistakes, the board pushed him out. The successors didn't have Land's genius. They had his company, his infrastructure, his brand. But they didn't have his ability to see around corners, his willingness to bet everything on an impossible idea, his instinct for what customers wanted before they knew they wanted it. Under their leadership, Polaroid became a company that managed decline instead of pursuing growth. They cut costs. They rationalized operations. They extracted value instead of creating it. A great company requires great leadership, and great leadership is not inherited. Blood relation doesn't transfer talent. Corporate succession doesn't guarantee vision. The people who run a company determine its fate, and Polaroid's fate was determined by leaders who couldn't match the founder. The camera sits in a drawer somewhere, millions of them. Scattered across attics and basements and garage sales around the world, The SX70 that cost $180 in 1972, the One Step that captured birthday parties, the Spectra that recorded graduations, relics now, artifacts of a vanished technology, monuments to a company that lost its way. But the photographs survive. Faded, yes. Colors shifted by decades of storage, edges curling, the chemistry breaking down, but still there. Still holding memories in that distinctive white frame. Edwin Land once said that his true invention was not the camera or the film, but the photograph itself. Not the technology, but the magic. The moment captured, the memory preserved, the miracle of light and chemistry and time frozen forever. That magic hasn't disappeared. It just moved. It lives now in smartphone cameras and cloud storage and social media feeds. The instant gratification that Land pioneered is now universal. Every photograph is instant. Every moment can be captured and shared in seconds. The daughter who asked why she couldn't see the picture immediately would be satisfied today. She can see it now. Everyone can. The Polaroid empire is gone. The factories are silent. The workers have scattered to other industries. The company exists only as a name, a brand licensed to products that Land would never have recognized. But the magic endures. The magic always endures. It just doesn't belong to Polaroid anymore. Welcome to the silent Polaroid factory, where America's instant dream was built, dominated, and destroyed. The machines are still. The workers are gone. The formula is forgotten. But somewhere, in a drawer or a shoebox or a frame on a wall, a photograph is developing. Colors blooming from nothing. A memory taking shape. The magic continuing without the magician. That's the final lesson. Companies die. Technologies fade. Empires collapse. But the human desire to capture moments, to freeze time, to hold memories in our hands, that desire is eternal. Edwin Land understood that better than anyone. He just forgot that the desire doesn't care how it gets satisfied. Polaroid satisfied it for 50 years. Then they stopped innovating. They stopped adapting. They stopped listening. And the desire found other ways to be satisfied. The silent factory speaks. Listen carefully. It's telling you something important. Adapt or die. Innovate or disappear. The market doesn't care about your legacy. It only cares about what you're building today. Polaroid forgot that. And now the factory where they made their last stand sits dark and abandoned. A tombstone for an empire that refused to change. The photograph is still developing, but Polaroid isn't holding it anymore.